course, that the coalition government has finally agreed on a 2024 budget plan after weeks of intense negotiations. Let's put it like that. Can you tell us more?
Yes, there started to be an air of lame duck over this German coalition government, unable for weeks to decide where to cut 17 billion, which was needed after the Constitutional Court ruled the previous budget unconstitutional. So that's a big breakthrough of the day, and the German Chancellor can travel to Brussels knowing that whatever he promises is now actually backed up by the money he would need to fulfill those promises. And that's particularly important when he starts trying to pull those heads together to get the EU on course to continue to support Ukraine, particularly with Viktor Orban of Hungary potentially blackmailing the European Union into a situation where they cannot decide because they have to decide unanimously also on 50 billion that the EU wants to provide, but also on whether to start those talks on membership of Ukraine with the European Union. So we expect him to reference this, but he starts off with what can be seen as nothing less than an inner political victory, not a triumph, but a victory, which simply means that there is a budget and this government is being held together for now.
As you said, Michaela, I mean, it was a very, very big issue here in Germany, wasn't it? A 17 billion euro financial gap for the budget. I mean, do we now, there is an agreement now, but do we know, I mean, is this going to bring any likely cuts? How will people be affected by this? Do we know that yet?
Well, there will be some cuts. There will be a significant chunk taken of those cuts needed, taken out of the transition funds towards a green economy, but the big projects all remain in place. 17 billion out of a 450 billion budget, that really wasn't that much money to cut down. The problem was homemade, and it was particularly tricky because there is a three-way coalition here in Germany, and that spending, those spending commitments were essentially the glue holding this together.
So Michaela, I'm going to have to interrupt you, I'm afraid. That's right.
Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Heute Morgen ist Donald Tusk als polnischer Premierminister
Donald Tusk was sworn in as the Polish Prime Minister, and before I will have the opportunity in Brussels to meet him personally, I already want to say from here, congratulations, Prime Minister. Looking forward to good cooperation. Donald Tusk announced to bring Poland back into the heart of the European Union, and that's exactly where Poland belongs, into the center of Europe as an indispensable part of the European Union. Poland's role in and for Europe is more important today than ever before. Its security policy contribution is important in view of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, and Germany and Poland have sheltered more refugees from Ukraine than all the other European member states. We will, when it comes to the control of irregular migration, we will cooperate more strongly. The booming economy in Poland is strongly connected to the German economy. Germany and Poland have a shared interest in the enlargement of the European Union towards the southeast of Europe becoming a reality. And this is why I'm looking forward to bringing forward the European Union together with Poland and together with France in the format of the Weimar Triangle. Very quickly, across all levels, we're going to deepen our working contacts with Poland. We are united by the goal to support Ukraine in terms of reconstruction, defense and security, and on its way towards the European Union. Germany is ready to extend the civil society cooperation across the border and to set a signal, also in terms of remembrance policy together with Poland. Our intensive economic and scientific relations play a very important role, particularly in the regions close to the border. And I'm particularly pleased to welcome the newly elected Polish Prime Minister in the weeks to come here in Berlin. And not only in our cooperation with Poland, also when it comes to the European Council, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is at the focus of our deliberations. This war, which has been waging for 2 years almost, remains being the central security policy challenge for our continent. And every day I'm deeply impressed by what the Ukrainian soldiers are achieving. When Russia invaded Ukraine February 2022, Ukraine has liberated half of the occupied persons. The Black Sea fleet has lost its control over parts of the Black Sea. 200 freight vessels were able to bring grains and sunflower oil into other parts of the world, although the agreement had been cancelled by Russia regarding grain exports. And something else is different today as compared to the previous winter. The air defense in Ukraine is better able to defend itself against drones and missile attacks with the Flak Panzer's GPAD, the RST system, and Patriot air defense systems that has been provided by Germany. We are making a major contributions towards increasing the defense readiness of Ukraine. I'm grateful to the Federal Minister of Defense to have pledged further support and to provide drone sensors, drones, and IST systems. It's exactly the systems that are urgently needed in Ukraine. The second Patriot system from Germany is going to be deployed in Ukraine this year. In addition to that, we have armored vehicles, ammunition, and winter clothing for soldiers and power generators to bridge power gaps. And all these equipments are urgently needed because Russia has put its economy into the service of war. Arms production is at its peak. The Russian leadership has recruited hundreds of thousands of soldiers, tens of thousands of soldiers, which are being sent by Putin without consideration. Meat grinder is what it's being called. And it's what is happening at the front line. And that points to the fact that Putin is firmly decided to defeat Ukraine, and he banks on the international support, waging international support for Ukraine. And the risk that his calculation might be correct is something that cannot be fended off easily. US President Biden has to fight to provide funds to support Ukraine, and a solution is not yet visible. Within the European Union, almost all member states agree that the budget of Ukraine will be bolstered with 50 million euros. But how that shall be done is something that hasn't been agreed upon. Hungary has not consented yet, and at the same time, such a decision is closely connected to the negotiations about the adjustment of the multi-annual financial framework of the European Union until 2027. And this is what we are going to talk about tomorrow and the day after that. I will fight for a robust, reliable financial support for Ukraine for the years to come, because what is at stake is the security of Europe. And this is priority for Germany. And at the same time, it means that we need to stay realistic with regard to all the other expectations and wishes with regard to the European budget. And in view of the budget situation in many member states, and in view of billions that haven't been spent, in view of all that, the first task will be to prioritize these funds. Germany makes its contribution to the funding facility of Ukraine. And we want to continue the war facility for Ukraine with one mechanism in which significant bilateral weapons deliveries are also acknowledged. In view of the risks and in view of a long-lasting war, Germany will play an important role when it comes to providing support to Ukraine. Russia's war of aggression is not a war that takes place somewhere on the globe. The question is whether Putin can push through his imperialistic plans that he follows very openly. The question is whether borders are secure or whether annexations become normal in Germany, in Europe. This is a decisive question for the safety and security of Europe, of Germany, and this question is being decided also in Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, after the decision of the Federal Constitutional Court on the Climate Fund and Transition Fund, the Economic Minister and Finance Minister have agreed tonight on proposals for the budget for 2024 in Germany. And one element of these proposals are our support of Ukraine to be secured, just like we have planned it, and as long as it is necessary and needed. In addition, we have 8 billion euros for supply of weapons, finance support for the Ukrainian budget, and 6 billion euros for the support of Ukrainian refugees here in Germany. But there's something else which is clear. Should the situation get fiercer in Ukraine because of a deterioration of the situation at the front line or because of lack of support by other member states, and maybe because of an increasing threat, we will have to respond to these changed conditions. Today, nobody knows whether such a situation will come about or not. But in order to be prepared for such a development that might take place, we have already agreed upon to propose a decision to the Parliament according to Article 112 of the Federal Constitution, where we are allowed to surpass the budget's constraints. At the NATO summit, we agreed on security pledges for Ukraine. In the meantime, 31 countries have followed our pledge. At its core, the point is that the defense capacities of the Ukraine will be extended together to such an extent that Russia will never dare to make another attack against Ukraine. Germany has taken over, together with France, the leadership in air defense. The UK takes the lead for maritime capabilities. Netherlands and Denmark will equip Ukraine with F-16 fighter jets. Others take care of armored vehicles, and Germany plays a central role with its tanks, artillery, and vehicles that we provide and supply, and for which we also supply spare parts and ammunition. The signal to the Russian leadership is very clear. You cannot just hope that we stand by. At the same time, we deprive Russia, through our sanctions, from the needed resources for its war. And we have the 12th sanction package on the table. Alongside our reliable support, which has been aligned internationally, the expansion, the enlargement policy of the European Union is part of our strategy for our fight for peace in Europe. The European Commission recommends accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova. The German government supports this expressively. We must not let any doubt come up where the path of these countries leads to, into a free, united Europe. as free nations. The same goes for Georgia, which shall be given the candidate status, and it also applies to the Western Balkan countries. We will meet them earlier tonight during the West Balkan Summit. Albania, North Macedonia, Kosovo, Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina has been waiting for their EU accession for many, many years. It's high time now that we all take a look at the whole picture, both the European member states and the accession candidates. And this whole picture is the historic opportunity to anchor this region firmly in Europe and to leave the conflicts of the past belong to the past. This is what the region will profit from, but this is also something that a geopolitically enlarged European Union will benefit from. And therefore, I'm in favor of taking more decisions with the qualified majority, also within the accession process. Why can't we decide with a qualified majority about certain stages of the accession procedures? The national parliaments will decide whether negotiations will be started, but not each individual decision will have to be decided by each country and can be vetoed by each country. If countries have advanced their reforms, as is the case in Albania, for instance, then this needs to be recognized. Otherwise, it will cause damage for the enlargement process as such. And this is something that we must not allow to happen. In North Macedonia, the government and opposition have set the course towards a change of the constitution. Now they have to implement it in the interest of their own country. I'm very grateful to the colleagues of the CDU if you could use your influence so that your sister party in North Macedonia can work and will work constructively to bringing about a solution. In parallel to that, I continue working towards a better cohesion within the region. Within the Berlin process, we agreed that travels will be made possible in the region, and graduations and certificates will be mutually recognized. We have extended these rules during our meeting in Tirana, and the next meeting of this process is going to take place in fall of 2024 again. This is not a replacement or a substitution for an EU accession, but the accession conditions continue to apply. There will not be one watered down. If you expect candidate countries to bring about reforms, you should not shy away from this task yourselves. The European Union needs reforms that keep up with the enlargement process. Last year, during the Prague Karls University visit, I made proposals with regard to this topic, which kicked off a discussion amongst member states. And this is a debate which we're going to continue and deepen during the European Council. My goal is that we find an agreement so that until next summer we have a clear roadmap for the reform process, so that after the European election we can swiftly take the step from theoretical discussions towards practical implementations. For that we need a solid foundation. We need the input of the European Commission for that. Concerns against the possible change of the European treaties is something that shouldn't divert our attention, because the treaties that are already in existence are flexible enough. I have already talked about majority decisions in the Council, and they will take a central role, play a central role. This goes beyond the enlargement process. It also concerns foreign policy and tax policies. In addition to that, we also have to talk about how the European Commission will be able to continue working after a EU enlargement. These are the questions that we are going to discuss on the European Council, and many more questions. These reforms have not been followed by Germany with the necessary energy, and we have made a major step forward ever since. How difficult it is to bring about a European consensus in central foreign policy questions is something that we have learned around the discussions on the response to the terrorism attack in Israel carried out by Hamas. After longer deliberations, we were able to find a common line. Israel has the right to defend itself against this horrible terror attack. The Hamas has to release all hostages immediately. This is what we are continue to fight for with all our energy. At the same time, humanitarian ceasefires, kind of which have already been brought about, are indispensable to provide the population in Gaza with indispensable relief aid means. This is necessary, and they need to be imposed in a reliable manner. The discussion on a European level must not stop at this level. We already need to think about the time after the end of the armed conflict. Then we will have to discuss how a robust security structure can look like, and Europe should make a contribution towards this discussion, not only by providing funds and humanitarian aid after reconstruction. After the terror of 7th of October, we know that each order after this conflict needs to be able to provide reliable protection for the citizen in Israel. Such an order should also involve those countries in the region, those countries that have concluded normalization agreements with Israel or have been considering to do so. Then the question will be who is going to take on the responsibility in Gaza. A strengthening of the political responsibility of the autonomy structures is something that has to be considered, although we have to also address its shortcomings. Reconstruction economic perspectives can provide for stability and contribute to stability. The European Union can play a role, but also the regional countries and the Gulf states should take on responsibility. All that will be successful only if we have a political approach. And such an approach remains being a two-state solution that we have to get closer to stepwise. Bringing about peace in this conflict between Palestine and Israel allows Israel to focus on the strategic threat, namely Iran and its regional support and supporters. The German government carries out international deliberations and discussions about these post-conflict scenarios, and in the European Union we should also prepare for such a process already today. And this is what I am going to advance and advocate for in the days to come. Dear colleagues, 6 months before the European election, we will discuss in the 2 days to come which tasks will still have to be fulfilled, and 3 things are of crucial importance in this context. We want to reduce bureaucracy to start with, and therefore it's very good that the European Commission has made this part of their working program. We want to see ambitious proposals, just like we have proposed it to happen together with France. Secondly, we need an agreement with the European Parliament about a shared European asylum system. This is high priority for Germany. The same goes for a closer cooperation with the transit countries. This also includes the agreement between the European Union and Turkey to be filled with new details and new life. Thirdly, we need an agreement on the reform of the Pact for Growth and Stability. The goal is that exceedingly high public debts be reduced, and at the same time, we need to facilitate necessary investments into the transition. After European finance ministers have developed this dossier together, I'm confident that we will be able to bring about an agreement on this point. Ladies and gentlemen, We're looking back to 4 weeks of very intensive negotiations about the impact of the ruling of the Federal Constitutional Court on the transition budget. We had to take important decisions because there are clear and understandable interests behind each item of our budget. We agreed on putting priorities onto tasks and expenditures without putting at risk the safety in Germany. It was always about how we can provide safety and security in Germany in turbulent times after the change of history. We suggest to the legislator that expenses be reprioritized and individual projects be dispensed with. In the core budget, we're going to save 17 billion euros through the abolishment of climate adverse investments, through the reduction of federal allowances and other measures. The finance ministry is going to implement these political agreements and will provide the Parliament with the necessary wording so that the Budget Committee can review the budget and Parliament can deliberate about the budget for 2024 in the very beginning of the year. I want to thank the Ministry for Economic Affairs and the Finance Minister and everybody else who worked on bringing about this compromise. This was tough work, but very constructive work. And at the end, we see that we have reached a good compromise, a democratic compromise in the best sense of the word. Thank you very much.
And that was the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz addressing the German Parliament, using his speech to talk about the importance of EU unity and the importance of working together to continue supporting Ukraine and to bring about an end to the war. He talked specifically about EU enlargement. He said giving Ukraine and the Western Balkan states an opportunity to move towards EU membership will make keeping the peace easier. And he also addressed the conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. But then he also addressed issues closer to home, including the government's agreement on a budget for next year. To break all of this down for us, we're going to bring in DW's chief political editor, Michaela Küffner, who is at the German Parliament and who was listening to Scholz's speech. Michaela, what stood out for you in particular in what we just heard there from Chancellor Scholz?
What stood out to me is that he's going to Brussels, first of all, no longer as the German Chancellor who has those budget question marks over his head. So this clearly was the internal deadline for the three-way coalition here to go to Brussels and actually be able to commit funding without a doubt hanging over that. He says he's going there with a mission to convince the European leaders for a longer-term perspective over several years, he said, in support of Ukraine. This comes at a time where a 50 billion package is threatened by Hungary, Hungary just one country to be blocked in its tracks. That's the setting as he heads towards Brussels. He also spoke on the Middle East, and he wants EU leaders to think about the day after the fighting ends in Gaza between Israel and Hamas, what that order could look like, the transition phase, because the aim, he reaffirmed, has to be a two-state solution there. So he wants the EU to put its money where its mouth is on Ukraine. And it's safe to say that talking about the Middle East within a European Union context will be very controversial indeed.
OK. And he did make a point, didn't he, of talking about accession negotiations, talking about the idea of giving Ukraine the chance to look at EU membership. And he sort of presented this as also a way of keeping the peace, didn't he? And of course, not everyone agrees with allowing Ukraine and the Western Balkan nations to move towards the EU.
Well, again, the spotlight will be on Viktor Orban, who is threatening to stop that decision in its tracks. That's one of the problems Olaf Scholz also highlighted, that unanimity is needed for any kind of such decisions. That's something he says needs to be reformed in the future. As far as the EU is concerned, overall the commitment is there. None other than the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who happens to be German, made that commitment that those accession talks should start, but now it's up to all members to decide this. And if, let's put it this way, if an EU summit can't even decide what it's effectively already signaled towards Ukraine, that will be seen as a failure of this summit. At the same time, you have the Western Balkan countries who've been promised EU accession for much longer, who are also eager to make progress there. They are also gathering in Brussels. And then there's the very question where the EU wants to take its foreign policy in the future, whether it actually has the energy and the decisiveness to actually come up with some reforms. And here also, the Chancellor mentioned a deadline. Those next EU elections are coming up in early summer of 2024. And it's time for the EU to show and demonstrate that it can not just talk, but also act on those major crises that are having a direct impact on the wealth and the well-being of the European Union.
And Michaela, I did just want to ask you about what he said about the German budget. He mentioned that, a decision has been made. He said it was hard work, but he called it a good compromise now that Germany has, or the coalition government has agreed on a budget for next year. Is that painting it pretty? I mean, this was a pretty serious situation, wasn't it, for the coalition government?
Well, it is his job to paint it pretty, but it did take 4 weeks after that Constitutional Court ruling for this three-way coalition to remix the glue of spending that is actually keeping this coalition together. All had to give to a certain degree. We now have seen some cuts, nothing huge. I mean, let's put it this way, 17 billion is not such a huge chunk of money if you have a budget that is more than 450 billion. At the same time, what we also saw in this compromise is that there are at least two big loopholes. For now, the government says it will stick with the black zero. It will not go beyond the debt allowed under that regulation. At the same time, if Ukraine were to become less stable, if another big donor of Ukraine was to fold, meaning the United States, but not mentioning it in as many words, then we would have a situation where all three already agreed that they would break with Germany's vow of a ceiling to that debt.
DW's chief political editor, Michaela Küffner. Michaela, thanks so much for that. OK, we're going to take a look at our other news stories now. And Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has met with political leaders in Washington, D.C. in a bid to get more support for his country's fight against Russia. The White House says current aid for Ukraine will run out by the end of the year as Republicans in Congress refuse to release